let's talk about radical equations. And that is an equation where your x is underneath a radical. So the equation I'm going to take us through is this one. When you're dealing with square roots, remember that we have some domain restrictions. Underneath your square root, if we're in the real numbers, cannot be negative. So I'm going to go ahead and write the restriction that that part that's underneath my radical, this x plus 18, this has to be greater than or equal to 0, which means x has to be greater than or equal to negative 18. So I'm just going to kind of keep that as a side note to make sure that whatever answer I get doesn't violate this domain. The other thing that we know about radicals is that when we root them, the outcome is going to be also greater than or equal to 0. So looking at this over here, that negative 2x, that must also be greater than or equal to 0, which means that x also has to be less than or equal to 0 when you solve that inequality. So here are the two restrictions that we have on our solution. So when I get my answers, I need to go back and verify that they don't violate either of these conditions. So let's solve. First thing I notice is that my x, one of my x's, is stuck underneath the radical. I can't get to it because it is kind of glued together by that square root. So I'm going to undo that square root by squaring both sides of my equation. The exponent and the radical undo each other, and I've got just x plus 18 on the left and a positive 4x squared on the right. Since this is now a quadratic, let me get 0 on one side and I will solve. I can factor this one because when I multiply 4 and negative 18, I get negative 72. And there are two numbers that multiply to negative 72, but also add to negative 1, which is our linear term. Those numbers are 8 and negative 9. So since I can factor, I'm going to do that. I'll factor by grouping. You factor however you want, and I will meet up with you in just a second. Now that we've got it in factored form, we're going to take each factor individually, set it equal to 0, and then solve to find our two possible solutions. So I've got two possible answers. My first one, x is negative 2. My second one, x is 9/4. But let's go back and make sure that neither of these violate either of our domain restrictions. The first restriction is that everything has to be greater than or equal to 18. So negative 2 fits that requirement, and 9/4 also fits that requirement. So we're good there. The second condition is that everything has to be less than or equal to 0. X is negative 2, that's less than 0, so that fits that requirement, but 9/4 does not fit that requirement. So this is not a solution. And the only solution to this equation that I'm going to have is that x is negative 2. And that is all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.